Failure will teach you things that success would never teach you, and that is so crucial. Hello everyone, and welcome to the third installment of the Prototype podcast. Today, this is a solo podcast with just me, your host, Mabel, Ubong. And I thought I would do something different for this episode. I think after the past two episodes, you've learned about two amazing entrepreneurs, and I really want this podcast to focus on you and the action that you can take. Because the whole point of this podcast is to just encourage people to turn their ideas into reality. But it's really interesting when we think about what reality is, what imagination is. It leads us to very many profound conversations. And today I just want to talk about an anti-vision. And basically I want to encourage you to find out exactly what you don't want in your life. What is the vision of the future that you would hate? And I know that sounds really negative. I know you might think, well, what's the point of doing that? That would just make me feel upset. It would make me feel that it's pointless. But the way I think of what anti-vision does, it makes you realize what are the habits, what are the people, what are the frameworks you have in place that are wrong. And subconsciously, I've always had, in a sense, a sort of anti-vision. And the anti-vision is kind of derived from things that I've learned, things I've read, because I read a lot of philosophy, and that's kind of where it's derived from. So basically, I'm going to define what an anti-vision is. So it's the future you don't want, and it's the patterns and the people and the habits you have that you follow currently that may lead you down a path of destruction, I might say. And I think having an anti-vision kind of anchors you in a way. It makes you actually think about what is real. Because when you think about the future is at some point in time, and you kind of have to imagine what happens. Whereas an anti-vision is based in reality, based on what you're doing right now and your current habits. This may lead you down this path of destruction. So I want to give you a few examples of anti-visions put in place, anti-visions that you may know about or you may not know about, but things you can go look at maybe after you listen to this. So one of my favorite philosophers, Marcus Aurelius, was a Roman emperor. And the reason why he was different, he was named one of the last great emperor in Rome. And it's because he had this nuanced way of thinking in his book Meditations, which is basically his journal, and was never meant to be read by millions of people. But he talks a lot about embarrassing yourself, about being negative and putting yourself in these situations so that it makes you realize how important the good moments are. And you've probably heard this so many times, but I think the way it's written and the way you can relate to it on so many levels is so interesting, and it brings me back to that anti-vision. When I think about what Marcus Aurelius said, he's consistently telling you to look within yourself, to reflect, and to see that, hey, maybe you go out in the street and you're not feeling good, and you think people are looking at you, they're laughing at you, and it makes you feel worse. But the whole point is that you must retreat within yourself. And that retreating within yourself comes from creating that anti-vision and realizing that things aren't that straightforward. And now the other example I'd like to give is Carl Jung. Carl Jung is a famous Swiss psychologist, and I heard about him a few years ago. I was listening to one of Jordan Peterson's lectures, and he was talking about the book Ion. Ion spelled A-I-O-N. And he was saying how it was the most terrifying book he's ever read. So immediately I had to go find that book and start to read it. And Carl Jung, he talks a lot about the self and how we can define parts of ourselves. And the book goes into extensive detail, and it goes into religion, it goes into psychology. But one of the biggest takeaways from it was this quote that he wrote in the book, and it says, "No tree is said to grow to heaven if it doesn't have its roots in hell." And I think the first time I heard that quote, I was kind of like taken aback, because essentially what he's saying that in order to reach that greater good, you have to an extent have those roots going all the way down to the negative. And essentially that's how I translate what an anti-vision is. In order to equally reach your full potential and to succeed, you equally have to see the opposing side. And I hope this makes sense, but having both flip sides kind of encourage you to do more. So if I have an anti-vision in terms of like a habit that I have, maybe I wake up late every day, and I know that if I continue to wake up late every day, eventually I'll just be sleeping in and I'll be less productive. And that will lead to my overall anti-vision of the future I don't want. And so instead, you take that anti-vision and you use it to fuel the vision of the future. And I really do encourage you to actually sit down and create your own anti-vision. Think about everything you don't want to happen, things that people and things, places, and like things that you just would hate to happen. I think having that negativity is important. It's still a part of yourself. You can't just say, I'm going to be positive every day. You have to have that balance. And that balance is so integral and it's so important. And now that I've explained what anti-vision is, I've explained a few examples from prominent figures, Marcus Aurelius and Carl Jung. I'd like to speak about how your anti-vision can lead to embracing failure. One of the reasons I created this podcast is to encourage you to fail. And not enough people say that. People always say, succeed, succeed, but never see the flip side, the same as an anti-vision. Failure will teach you things that success would never teach you. And that is so crucial. Because if you don't fail, you'll always keep winning. And then if you do make a blunder at some point, you will never know how to solve it. And when you define failure, you can't actually define it if you don't have standards, if there's no expectations. Failure needs to be measured relative to success. So in a sense, you can't have success without failure, and therefore you can't have failure without success. The two sides of the same coin, and the eventual leading to you can't have a vision if you don't have an anti-vision. So having that anti-vision is so crucial to your development and to, in a sense, get to the eventual goal that you like. And I hope that this podcast and this space I create can give you the opportunity to have space to fail, to learn from people who have failed, to learn from people who use the failure and tell you about their failures, so that you can relate and you can feel more confident and more powerful to embrace any idea you have, take action, and put it into reality. And again, to prototype, to adapt, and then iterate, to eventually realize the goal you want. And I know that eventually, not to sound really dark, but and again, this is the whole point of the video, and also the whole point of this episode. Like, the only true failure you'll ever have is the failure you have when you are on your deathbed. When you think about the regrets, think about the things that you never did, the ideas you never realized, the ideas you never took action. And not to sound morbid, but if you think about graveyards and you think about the amount of people and all the dead ideas that never came to fruition because people didn't want to start, people just didn't want to fail. People were so scared that other people would judge them that they forgot at the end of the day what truly matters is themselves and their purpose. So, again, this is a really short episode, but I just do encourage you to make an anti-vision, because this anti-vision will propel you into fulfilling your vision of the future, your perfect vision. And again, I know that this idea of anti-vision can be negative, but the whole point is I'm telling you that this anti-vision will encourage you, motivate you to do more, so you don't let that anti-vision become true, because that is based in reality. Whereas if you have your vision, it's always imagination. So yeah, have your anti-vision so that you can succeed. Thank you for watching and listening to episode 3 of the Prototype podcast, and I hope you enjoy it. And I'm just hoping that maybe if you can leave a comment on what your anti-vision is and how you are taking steps to avoid that anti-vision.